Well, there is no end to cross-border terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir. 2 days after 2 BSF jawans were killed in an attack on a BSF convoy, militants have now launched an attack in Pulwama district. One militant has been killed in the attack and the combing operations are still going on. The terrorist was gunned down in Pulwama. Suspected militants also attacked a police post in a remote area of Udhampur district in Jammu, but no terrorist has been found as yet. Managing editor of TVTN, Rahul Kaval, joins us live from Jammu. Rahul, do you think that this is in retaliation to what happened in Udhampur? We're seeing these fresh strikes that has been reported now.
Avantika, at multiple points in Jammu and Kashmir, in the hinterlands and also along the international border and on the LOC, ceasefire violation reports coming in, reports also of a terrorist attack in Pulwama, and then the one that you mentioned in Basant Nagar in Udhampur, in the patch that we are in currently, where there seeming to be conflicting reports. The first set of information coming in from the local police seems to indicate that this was an altercation between Jawans of the VDC, the Village Defence Committee, and the SHO, which had a police jockey deep inside the jungles, about 4 hours at the very least away from the nearest roadhead. There was an altercation, and that's how the firing happened. They seem to indicate that it was out of some form of confusion. That's the word at least the cops are giving us. The army though seems to believe that this is a straightened out terror encounter. They say there were 4 terrorists. They managed to sneak away. They attacked the jockey, and the firing stopped around 11 o'clock at night. There was firing from both sides, and CRPF personnel have been deployed. Army people are marching there. It's quite far away from where roads can take you, and therefore it's taking a bit of time for the security establishment also to be able to establish exactly what happened in the darkness at Basant Nagar, deep inside the jungles last night.
Well, we do believe that there is a security alert there. Situation sounds to be quite grim and tense. Rahul, if you could just take us through the security preparedness and also give us an update as to what are you hearing from the army specifically. We do believe that combing operations are going on.
As you know, Avantika, Udhampur has been a relatively peaceful part of Jammu and Kashmir for the last 2 decades. There were some incidents of terror here in the early 90s, but ever since then, there's been relative peace in Udhampur. Senior army officers I've been speaking to are trying to understand the reason behind trying to activate the Udhampur sector. Unlike pockets of the Kashmir Valley where terrorists still enjoy a fair amount of residual local support, here in Udhampur the majority of the people are deeply against the terrorists, and therefore they don't enjoy the kind of shelter, the kind of food, clothing that they would get in some pockets of the Kashmir Valley, and therefore the security establishment here is trying to understand why would the terrorists want to activate the relatively quiet sector of Udhampur. A senior officer I was speaking to did admit that because it had been so peaceful for so long, therefore the level of guard had been lowered, and that's not really a mistake or a fault. That's something which is very natural. It's also human behavior. When things are so peaceful, not for a day or a 2 or a week or a month, but for 20 years, therefore clearly the level of, say, combing, the level of road opening parties, QRTs is not the same in Udhampur as it is in Kashmir Valley or in Poonch or in Rajouri, where there are constant attacks from terrorists. That's something that is now being reassessed. Udhampur being put on par with some of the other parts of the state where the level of vigil is being enhanced substantially. They're also seeing this as an attempt being made to destabilize the peace process. Started once again by the Prime Minister and his Pakistani counterpart Nawaz Sharif. They're saying an attempt is being made to try and ensure that the atmosphere is not left conducive for the peace talks. Now, why would the Pakistani army want to do that is something the army doesn't want to talk about. They're saying, we have an enemy, the enemy is poking us, we're hitting them back hard.
All right, very strong statement there. In fact, India has stood firm and has said that absolutely no, terror activity will be tolerated, and that a spirited, response will be given to any sort of terror activity coming from across the border. Rahul, you are in Jammu. I also want to get an update on, the interrogation process that is going on, for the terrorist who is still in security forces captivity. He's been singing and, giving a lot of chilling confessions, but what's the latest that you have?
Oh, absolutely. The NIA team is constantly interrogating this terrorist. We were speaking to some officers who were involved in the interrogation. They seem to indicate that he's constantly changing their statements. And I asked them that how do you then figure out when he's lying and when he's actually telling the truth? And it's very interesting. These are trained psychologists who study human behavior and who are able to pinpoint and pick from the twitch of the eye, from the manner in which you speak, from the manner in which you maintain eye contact with your interrogators, when you're lying and when you're not. So they're taking all this information down, then you're doing their own body analysis to try and determine which part of what Naved is saying is the truth, where is it that he's lying. And essentially we've now been able to get telephone numbers, coordinates of where Naved was born, where he trained, his school, his family. And what's interesting, Avantika, is that his family background seems to be quite different from that of Ajmal Qasab. Ajmal Qasab came from a very impoverished family. This person, Naved, seems to have come from a family that is relatively better off. Why then would he be pushed into terrorism? The psychoanalysis that's being drawn, the profile that's being drawn, seems to indicate that, and this is of course based on what the officers are working on here, seems to indicate that they believe that here's a person who wasn't accepted by society. Why would somebody who comes from a relatively well-to-do family, who's not very religiously indoctrinated, take up weapons? Why would he go across the border and start waging this jihad? In society, they believe there are people who are not accepted well with their families, who are considered nikamma, who are considered incapable of doing well for themselves. They're the ones who are virtually pushed out, constantly nagged by the family, and that's how they're led on a road which ultimately leads them to terror. It's very interesting, the work that's going on, but what we know, Avantika, is that the Ministry of Home Affairs is preparing a dossier based on the interrogation report of Naved, which will then be taken by India internationally to shame and name and expose Pakistan for its role in the war against terror. The Minister of State for Home Affairs, Kiran Rijiju, confirmed this on record when we interviewed him for the newsroom last evening, and that's big. Taking the information that we have available internationally to show Pakistan a mirror and to force Pakistan to admit the truth.
Very quickly, Rahul, very quickly, very interesting what you were mentioning about the NIA closely monitoring the interrogation process, and this is undeniably a huge catch for the security forces, and all the valuable information that is coming out there would also be really a huge boost and help for the army as well, isn't it? I mean, they would be able to even target some of those terrorists who are in the Kashmir Valley hiding in the guise of civilians.
Not really, Avantika. A low-level terrorist, take for example a low-level employee in our company or any other company, is unlikely to have much understanding of the larger strategy at play or the overall game plan or the pockets of hideouts or who stays where. He has very limited tactical information about his operation, about his colleagues, his team, where he came in from, where he was trained, and the task that he'd been mandated. Beyond that, whether it's an Ajmal Qasab, whether it is a Naved Khan, they have very little understanding of the overall picture. So it's not correct to suggest that he would be able to give information on how many other terrorists are in the valley, where they're hiding, or what the larger game plan is. He has very limited information about that. But this is a massive propaganda coup. You've got living, breathing, talking proof of Pakistan's involvement in the game against terror. So the importance is not at a strategic level, it's at a tactical level, and the importance is that you've got proof of Pakistan's involvement, and that is what is crucial. You can't glean much information from him which can help you bust too many other terror hideouts. He hasn't been in India long enough, he's not senior enough in the hierarchy to understand all those aspects, but you can tom-tom him, you can showcase him as living evidence of Pakistan's involvement in this dangerous game.
Rahul, thank you so much for joining us, getting us those updates and all of the perspective that you just shared with us. But the question is, you know, whether Pakistan will speak up. They have already outrightly disowned the terrorist who is in Indian captivity, and clearly the arrest of Mohammad Naved has also put Pakistan in the dock, but there has been an absolute silence from our neighboring country.